this weekend. April and I were out looking at some houses because we were thinking about maybe selling and buying. And anyway, so we went to some open houses this weekend, and there's some things that screamed out at me that I just want to share with you guys, some tips. So the first tip that I want to give you is make sure, for gosh sakes, if you do an open house, that all the lights are turned on. I suggest that you get early. The market is kind of crazy, right? So if you're doing an open house and it's at 12 as an example, I would not get there at 11:45. Right? I would get there at 11:30, even maybe sooner, and just get in the zone, make sure everything's set up correctly. But most importantly, for gosh sakes, turn all the lights on. Went to an open house. It was 10 minutes into the open house. So it wasn't like we were early and still all the lights were not on. So I helped the agent out by turning lights on. Craziness. Second thing is, you know what? 11 o'clock, I think, is a better start time, because it seems like a lot of people are starting theirs at 12, or they're doing 1 to 3. You know what the best would be? Longer is better. In this kind of market, I would just go longer. First of all, I'd start at 11. I wouldn't start at 12. I'd start at 11. If everybody else doing 12, you start at 11. Get a jump on it. We went to an open house at 11 o'clock. It was packed. We went to another one. It was at 12 o'clock. It was not packed. It seemed like that 11 o'clock was a magic hour. 11 to 2 is what I recommend. If there's something negative about the house, do not point out that negativity as soon as the buyer walks in. I went to one open house. Somebody said to me, and they thought they were doing a nice thing. I think they might have it was just off the top of their head. They said, you know what? When you see the house, don't look at the square footage is maybe not that great, but man, it is impeccable. The workmanship, you've got to really look at the workmanship. It's so incredible. But because they said the square footage was not that big, I spent the whole time looking at how small the house was. And I did appreciate the workmanship. It was perfect. It was like you wouldn't have to spend $1 on this house, but I was too distracted by how small it was. So, your perception is your perception. What you think is good may be not good to somebody else, and what you think is bad is maybe not good to somebody else. The best thing to do is less is more. Sometimes keep your mouth shut. That's another thing. I got some agents that were really helpful. They were trying to give me a tour, and they were trying to point everything out. And what I noticed is the more they talked, the more it was a distraction for me to get a sense of the room. So I couldn't listen to them, and they're pointing me to this fixture or this feature, and I wanted to look at this other thing, and so I was getting pulled. So the agent giving me a tour actually was a distraction. Now, but the other side of that is the agent was giving me some really useful information. So how do you do that? How do you do both? So here's what I surmised. The best thing for you to do is to let the buyer, if you're going to give a buyer a tour, and it's not even on open house, what I recommend you do is when you bring them into the room, don't say anything. Let them lead the tour. Let them, because you don't know what they want to focus on and what's important to them. So the best thing is keep your mouth shut. Let them feel the room, look at the room, and when they're ready to leave the room, that's when I would point out certain things. Then I would point out this, point out that, and then shut up again and let them decide when they're now ready to leave the room, the next room. Because one of the agents, they were taking me like, oh, let me show you over here. And they were bringing me into another room when I wasn't done soaking up the room I was in, because it could be overwhelming for a buyer, because they're seeing the house for the first time. You're familiar with where the light switches are and where this room reads to that room and blah, 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 blah. But for a buyer, they get a little disoriented in that because they're trying to figure it out. Last two things is, in this COVID world, one of the things I noticed some agents, they were having a real struggle because there was a lot of buyers wanting to come into the house, and but there were just one agent. And they had this COVID thing that had to get signed, and they wanted people to sign in. They had to take their shoes up, So you had this one agent trying to manage people coming into the property while at the same time trying to give a tour. It was impossible. So my recommendation is to have, depending on where you are in the market, is to have two agents at your open house. If that's important, one agent will bring a couple through while the other agent greets and asks people to wait. perhaps even outside. And then when that tour is done, then the agents switch. That's one option. The other option is what I noticed is that in the same area had one agent who would only let in one couple at a time and one that let everybody in. So I think what you could do is if you look at the CDC guidelines and Julie, I sent you in Teams that link to the CDC. Did you see that?
I did. I was wondering why you sent that.
Yeah, if you can post that. I mean, I don't know what's going on with this call right now with the Zoom, but if you can post that in the closed Facebook group, so that way, and if you want to put a little note there, is that that way the agents can decide how to run their open houses. My suggestion is to stay up to date, because again, there are some of the guidelines are you can have a small group of people in a home as long as there's a lot of air flow going through and out, and people are still trying to keep social distance, and they're not hanging out like a party. See, a party is different. So, you know, the one agent that I saw, very top successful agent, she had a bunch of people coming in and out. Everybody had a mask, but it was the air, the doors were open, the windows were open. So I felt safe and it felt fine. And then had another agent next, just around the block, only one couple at a time. And what happened is actually a couple they just left. And I don't think that agent had to be that strict, especially because it was a vacant house and the square footage was like 4,000. It was like a huge, it's like I wouldn't even see the other buyers if I was in that house. There was so much distance. So anyway, those are my thoughts.